The morning had begun like any other in Oak Ridge Estates, birds chirping, sprinklers hissing across perfectly manicured lawns, the gentle hum of luxury vehicles departing for downtown offices. I retrieved my mail from the regulation Hampton-style mailbox that the HOA had mandated 3 years prior, bills, advertisements, and then something that made my heart stop, an official letter from the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. I tore open the envelope, expecting another ridiculous citation about my grass being a quarter-inch too high. Instead, what I found was far worse. The letter stated in cold, formal language that effective immediately, my monthly HOA dues had increased from $400 to $2,000. I read it again, and again. 5 times total, hoping the numbers would somehow rearrange themselves into something reasonable. They did not. There was no explanation, no justification, just a stern reminder that failure to comply would result in late fees, possible property liens, and legal action. The letter was signed by Karen Matthews, HOA president, with her signature flowing across the page like a victory flag. I dropped the rest of the mail onto the kitchen counter and called my wife Jennifer at work. "Have you seen this?" I asked when she answered. My voice trembled despite my best efforts to remain calm. "They have raised our dues by 500%. That is an extra $19,000 per year." "They cannot do that," Jennifer said, her voice equally shocked. "There has to be a vote. Did you get any notice about a meeting?" I had not. Neither had our neighbors, as I would soon discover. I spent the next hour calling everyone I knew in the neighborhood. No one had received prior warning. No one had voted. The increase had been imposed unilaterally, like a dictator's decree. By noon, my shock had transformed into burning anger. I changed out of my work clothes and drove straight to the HOA office, a small but immaculately maintained building at the entrance to our community. Through the glass front doors, I could see Karen seated behind her desk, typing away with perfect posture, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. I pushed through the doors with more force than necessary. "I need to speak with you about this letter," I said, holding up the crumpled paper. Karen looked up, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. Her lips curved into what might have been a smile but felt more like a sneer. "If this is about the dues increase, I am afraid it is non-negotiable. The board voted unanimously. Without input from residents, without proper notice. That violates the bylaws," I countered, my voice rising despite my determination to remain professional. 2 other HOA board members emerged from a back room, apparently curious about the commotion. Karen's smirk widened. She was enjoying this, having an audience for my humiliation. "If you cannot afford the increase, perhaps this neighborhood is too good for you," she said loudly, clearly performing for her colleagues. "We have certain standards to maintain. The higher dues reflect our commitment to excellence." My face burned with anger and embarrassment. Other residents waiting in the lobby lowered their eyes, unwilling to witness my public dressing down. "This is not about affordability," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "This is about proper procedure and fairness." Karen stood up, smoothing her expensive blazer. "File a formal complaint if you must. In the meantime, payment is due on the 1st. Late fees begin on the 5th. Have a nice day." She dismissed me with a wave of her hand and turned away, effectively ending the conversation. I stood there, seething, aware that I had been deliberately provoked and publicly belittled. On my way out, an elderly man, Mr. Parsons from 3 doors down, caught my eye. "It is happening to all of us," he whispered. "But everyone is too afraid to speak up. She has ways of making life difficult." That evening, Jennifer and I sat at our dining table, calculating what this increase would mean for our finances. Our children's college funds would take a hit. Vacation plans would be canceled. Our entire lifestyle would need adjustment. Maybe we should just pay it for now, Jennifer suggested, though I could tell the idea pained her. We could look for a new house, move somewhere without an HOA. I shook my head. No, this is our home. We should not be forced out by injustice. Something is wrong here, and I am going to find out what it is. That night, while Jennifer slept, I began collecting everything I could find: HOA bylaws, meeting minutes, financial reports from previous years. I started a detailed log of all interactions. I would document every move they made, because deep down I knew this was just the beginning. Karen and her board had declared war, and I was not going to surrender without a fight. The retaliation began almost immediately. 3 days after my confrontation with Karen, a citation appeared on my door. Violation: mailbox paint chip visible from street. Fine: $50 per day until corrected. I inspected my mailbox and found a chip smaller than my thumbnail on the back side, barely visible unless you were specifically looking for it. The next day, another citation. Violation: unauthorized garden placement. Fine: $75. The garden in question was a small cluster of native wildflowers my daughter had planted as part of a school project, in the exact same location it had been for the past 2 years without issue. By the end of the week, I had accumulated over $500 in fines for infractions that had either never been enforced before or were completely fabricated. Each citation bore Karen's signature, each a deliberate message that she was watching and would not tolerate dissent. I repainted the mailbox. I reluctantly removed my daughter's garden. I complied with every citation, no matter how petty or absurd. But the violations continued. A bush trimmed to 42 inches instead of the regulation 40 inches. A garden hose visible from the street for more than 24 hours. The temporary placement of a basketball hoop in my driveway. My neighbors watched in silence as the campaign against me intensified. Some offered sympathetic glances. Others avoided eye contact entirely, fearful of being associated with the community pariah. The monthly HOA meeting arrived, and I came prepared. I had researched the bylaws extensively and knew that any dues increase exceeding 15% required a community vote with at least 30 days' notice. I had my documentation organized, my arguments rehearsed. The community center was packed that evening. I took a seat near the front, notepad in hand. Karen called the meeting to order with the confident authority of someone who had never been challenged. When the time for public comments arrived, I raised my hand. Karen's eyes narrowed, but she acknowledged me with obvious reluctance. I would like to address the recent dues increase, I began, standing up. According to Bylaw Section 7.3, any increase exceeding 15% requires. Your time is up, Karen interrupted, though I had barely spoken for 10 seconds. I have not even started, I protested. Each resident is allowed 3 minutes for comments. Not when those comments are disruptive, she countered. This matter has been settled. The board voted unanimously. Without proper notification to residents, which violates. The microphone suddenly went dead. Karen gestured to a security guard I had never seen before at our previously informal community meetings. Please escort this gentleman out, she instructed. He is disrupting official HOA business. I stood in shocked silence as the guard approached. Several neighbors looked away in embarrassment. Others stared in morbid fascination. Not one person spoke up. The guard firmly gripped my arm. Sir, please come with me. I gathered my papers and allowed myself to be led out, dignity in tatters but resolve strengthened. As the door closed behind me, I heard Karen's voice resume the meeting as if nothing had happened. That weekend, I noticed Mrs. Jennings, an elderly widow who had lived in the neighborhood since its founding, struggling with her garden. I offered to help, and as we worked together, she began to speak. "Karen did the same thing to my Harold before he passed," she confided, her voice barely above a whisper despite us being alone. "He questioned the special assessment for the new clubhouse. The next day, they demanded we remove the shed he had built with his own hands, said it violated some code they had never enforced before. The stress was too much for his heart." I listened in growing horror as Mrs. Jennings detailed years of similar abuses, selective enforcement, intimidation, retribution against anyone who questioned the board's authority. Monday morning, I called a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. After reviewing my documentation, he confirmed my suspicions. "They have clearly violated procedure," he said, "but fighting this could take months, even years. HOAs have deep pockets and few legal restraints. They can make your life very difficult while the case proceeds." I hung up the phone, frustrated but not defeated. There had to be another way, something faster, more direct, a way to turn their power against them. I just needed to find it. While Karen continued her campaign of petty citations, I began a different kind of battle. Every evening after work, I devoted hours to research. I requested copies of property records from the county clerk. I studied plat maps and utility easements. I reviewed the HOA charter documents filed 20 years earlier when the development was first built. I was looking for anything, any legal crack in their armor that I could exploit. 3 weeks into my investigation, I discovered something unusual. The original neighborhood plans showed a utility easement running directly through what was now my backyard. This was not surprising in itself. Many properties had such easements. What caught my attention was that this particular easement contained the main electrical transformer that powered the HOA office, community center, security gates, and all common area lighting. I double-checked the property lines and easement rights. The transformer was technically on my property, though the easement gave the utility company access for maintenance. The HOA had no explicit rights mentioned in the documents. They were essentially using my property to power their operations without any formal agreement. My discovery coincided with an arrogant post from Karen on the neighborhood app. "Thanks to the new increased dues, we have installed enhanced security lighting around the clubhouse and pool area," she wrote. "The additional monthly cost per household is justified by the improved safety and property values we all enjoy." The post included photos of new floodlights illuminating the clubhouse and pool. Expensive lighting that we were all paying for, whether we wanted to or not. The next day, I contacted an electrician friend who worked for the city. I described my situation in hypothetical terms, careful not to reveal my actual intentions. "So legally speaking," I asked, "who controls access to a transformer on private property with an easement?" My friend explained that utility easements granted access rights to the utility company only. The property owner still owns the land. They cannot block utility company access, but they have rights regarding other entities using that access, especially if it affects their property. This was the crack I had been searching for. I hired a licensed electrician for a formal consultation, making sure to get his assessment in writing. He confirmed that the HOA's power supply indeed ran through my property, and that the connection point, including a major disconnect switch, was technically under my control. "Most homeowners never realize they have this kind of access," he explained. The utility company has right-of-way, but in disputes involving private third parties using your easement, you have more leverage than you might think. That evening, as I reviewed my findings, I received an unexpected visitor, Thomas Wilson, the HOA treasurer. He seemed nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder as if afraid of being seen at my house. "I cannot stay long," he said, refusing my offer to come inside. "I just thought you should know that things are not as stable as Karen makes them seem. The association is stretched thin financially. These new security measures have depleted most of our reserves." "Then why the enormous dues increase?" I asked. Thomas lowered his voice further. "Karen has plans for a complete renovation of the clubhouse. New furniture, high-end appliances, marble countertops. The dues increase was calculated to cover her wish list, not actual needed maintenance." He left quickly after that, but his information confirmed what I had begun to suspect. The HOA's power, both literally and politically, was more fragile than it appeared. They depended on residents remaining ignorant and compliant. They depended on the lights staying on. I spent the next several days documenting everything meticulously. I photographed the transformer and disconnect switch on my property. I reviewed the legal language in the easement documents with painstaking attention to detail. I checked local regulations regarding utility disputes. Everything pointed to one conclusion. During a formal dispute over utility usage, the property owner had the right to control access through their easement until the dispute was legally resolved. Karen had created the perfect storm, an unauthorized dues increase, followed by electrical upgrades that directly utilized my property without consent. I drafted a formal dispute notice, citing the unauthorized use of my easement for their expanded electrical needs. I did not file it yet. That would come later. First, I needed to prepare for what would happen next, because once I made my move, there would be no turning back. The final piece fell into place when I confirmed that the HOA office stored all their records electronically, with no paper backups. Their security system, gates, and record-keeping all depended on continuous power. Their entire operation rested on a foundation they did not control. They had built their kingdom on my land, and they did not even know it. Tuesday evening arrived, the night of the HOA's monthly executive board meeting. Through strategic conversations with neighbors, I had learned that Karen had scheduled a special agenda item: enforcement actions for non-compliant households. My house was at the top of her list. The sun was setting as I walked casually to my backyard, legal documents tucked into a folder under my arm. I had spent the past week preparing for this moment, consulting with my lawyer, documenting the transformer location, and confirming my legal right to control access during a formal dispute. The utility box was unassuming, a green metal cabinet positioned near my property line, partially hidden by a row of hydrangeas. Most residents probably never noticed it, despite it being the central nervous system for the entire community's common areas. I unlocked the outer door with my property key, a key I had never had reason to use until now. Inside was exactly as the electrician had described: a series of breakers and switches, each controlling different aspects of the neighborhood's power grid. My hand hovered over the main disconnect that fed the HOA facilities. I inserted my official dispute notice into a weatherproof plastic sleeve and attached it to the inside of the cabinet door. Then I took several photographs documenting the notice placement, the current switch position, and the time displayed on my watch. At precisely 7:15 p.m., when I knew the board meeting would be in full swing, I grasped the heavy main breaker. I took a deep breath and pulled it firmly downward. The mechanism resisted briefly, then yielded with a satisfying thunk. The effect was immediate and dramatic. From my position, I could see the HOA office and community center plunge into sudden darkness. The security lights that had been installed with our increased dues flickered once, then died. The ornamental fountain stopped. The electronic gate at the community entrance froze mid-cycle. I closed and locked the utility cabinet, then walked calmly back to my house. Inside, I poured myself a glass of water and waited. The response came faster than I had anticipated. My phone began buzzing with text messages and calls from board members. I did not answer. Let them panic. Let them scramble. Let them feel, for once, what it was like to be powerless. At 7:30 p.m., I heard a commotion outside. From my window, I could see board members spilling out of the darkened community center, illuminated only by the glow of their phone flashlights. Karen was at the center, gesturing wildly, her face contorted with rage even in the dim light. By 8:00 p.m., my voicemail was full. The messages ranged from confused to threatening. The final one was from Karen herself. "This is completely unacceptable," she hissed into the phone. "The power outage has disrupted critical HOA business. If you know anything about this, you are legally obligated to report it immediately. There will be serious consequences for any resident involved in this disruption." At 9:00 p.m., I drafted a simple email to the entire board. To the Oak Ridge Estates HOA Board. I am writing to inform you that I have exercised my legal right as property owner to restrict unauthorized access to the utility easement on my property during a formal dispute. This action is in direct response to the unauthorized 500% increase in HOA dues and the subsequent installation of extensive electrical equipment powered through my property without proper consent or compensation. Attached, please find my formal dispute notice, which has also been physically posted at the disconnection site. As clearly stated in County Ordinance 47.3 regarding utility easement disputes, this restriction will remain in effect until the dispute is resolved through proper channels. I am available to discuss resolution terms tomorrow at 10:00 a.m. in the community park. Respectfully, my name. I attached copies of the relevant legal documents, property maps, and photographs of the transformer location. I included the written opinion from the licensed electrician confirming my rights. I had done my homework thoroughly. The response was immediate, a flurry of increasingly desperate messages. The board's secretary called, pleading for me to restore power for safety reasons. The vice president threatened legal action. Karen remained suspiciously silent. I turned off my phone, closed my laptop, and slept more peacefully than I had in months. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, for the first time since this battle began, I held the power. Morning arrived with a neighborhood transformed. Without power, the HOA office remained closed. The electronic community bulletin board displayed nothing but a black screen. The usually busy community center was abandoned. Most telling of all, Karen's immaculately maintained lawn sprinklers failed to activate at their usual 7:00 a.m. cycle. By 9:30 a.m., a crowd had begun to gather in the community park. News of the power outage had spread rapidly through text messages and phone calls. Residents who had never spoken to each other were now huddled in small groups, comparing notes and theories. I arrived at precisely 10:00 a.m., carrying a folder of documents and a portable speaker. Karen and the board members were already there, looking haggard and exhausted. Karen's perfectly styled hair now hung limply around her face. The board treasurer's usually crisp shirt was wrinkled and untucked. "What is the meaning of this?" Karen demanded as I approached. "Do you have any idea what you have done? The security system is down. The gate is stuck open. Anyone could walk into our community." "I am aware," I replied calmly. "I also know that the 500% dues increase was never properly voted on by the community, as required in Section 7.3 of our bylaws." Several nearby residents moved closer, listening intently. Karen noticed the growing audience and lowered her voice. "This is not the appropriate venue for this discussion," she hissed. "We should speak privately." "I disagree," I said loudly, ensuring everyone could hear. "This affects every homeowner in Oak Ridge Estates. There should be nothing private about how our dues are spent or how decisions are made." More residents were arriving by the minute. Many had received my email, which I had blind copied to every household. The crowd now numbered at least 50 people, more than had attended any HOA meeting in years. "You have no authority to cut power to community facilities," Karen insisted, her voice rising with anger and fear. "We will sue you for damages and costs." I removed the legal documents from my folder and held them up. "Actually, I do have that authority. The main transformer for all HOA facilities is located on my property. During a formal dispute over utility usage, property owners have the right to restrict access pending resolution. I have filed such a dispute regarding the unauthorized electrical upgrades made with our increased dues." Karen's face flushed red. "This is ridiculous," the board voted. "Without proper notification to residents," interrupted Mrs. Jennings, the elderly widow who had shared her story with me. She pushed forward through the crowd with surprising energy. "Just like you did when you forced my Harold to remove his shed, just like you have done for years." The crowd murmured in agreement. Other residents began sharing their own stories of selective enforcement, petty citations, and intimidation. "That is not relevant," Karen snapped. "The fact remains that critical infrastructure has been deliberately sabotaged and—" "Not sabotaged," I corrected. "Legally disconnected during a dispute procedure with proper notification. Your own lawyer can confirm this." As if on cue, a man in a suit approached, the HOA's attorney. He whispered something to Karen, whose face grew increasingly pale as he spoke. She shook her head in disbelief. "This cannot be legal," she insisted. "I have reviewed the documents," the attorney said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The easement is indeed on his property. The dispute has been properly filed. Until it is resolved, he has the legal right to restrict access." A young mother stepped forward from the crowd. "My children could not take warm showers this morning because the water heater in our unit depends on electricity from the community system. All because you raised our dues without telling us why." "The improvements were for everyone's benefit," Karen stammered. "The board determined." "The board?" shouted Mr. Parsons, the elderly man who had whispered to me weeks earlier. "You mean you and your friends? None of us voted for these improvements. None of us can afford this increase." More voices joined in, years of frustration suddenly finding an outlet. A neighbor had filmed the confrontation and was live streaming it. Within minutes, local news had picked up the story. HOA president faces resident revolt after massive dues hike. The tide had turned. Karen's power was crumbling before her eyes, and she knew it. The board members had begun to distance themselves physically from her, a visual representation of their rapidly dissolving solidarity. The community had found its voice, and it was loud. The emergency community meeting was scheduled for Saturday morning in the local elementary school gymnasium, neutral territory with no connection to HOA power sources. By then, Oak Ridge Estates had been without HOA-controlled electricity for 4 days. The security gate remained permanently open. The community center stood dark and unused. The ornamental fountains had grown stagnant. The gymnasium was packed beyond capacity. Residents who had never attended an HOA meeting in their years of living in the community now arrived early to secure seats. Local news cameras were positioned at the back of the room, documenting what had become a neighborhood revolution. Karen and the board members sat at a folding table at the front, looking diminished without their usual trappings of authority. No elevated platform, no microphones, no presentation screen displaying their official logo. Just 7 increasingly nervous people facing nearly 300 angry residents. The meeting was called to order by the HOA's attorney, who had assumed the role of neutral mediator. Karen sat silently, her usual confidence replaced by rigid defensiveness. "The first order of business," the attorney announced, "is to address the current utility dispute and power outage affecting community facilities." I stood up. "I am prepared to restore power immediately, conditional upon 3 things. First, the dues increase must be rescinded pending a proper community vote. Second, all citations and fines issued against homeowners in the past 30 days must be canceled. Third, there must be an independent audit of HOA finances for the past 3 years." The attorney looked to Karen and the board. "These seem like reasonable conditions to resolve the immediate crisis. Does the board accept these terms?" Before Karen could speak, the vice president leaned over and whispered something in her ear. She shook her head vehemently. The treasurer then joined the whispered conversation, his expression urgent. The back and forth continued for several uncomfortable minutes while the room watched in tense silence. Finally, the vice president took the microphone. "The board accepts these conditions." Karen's face contorted with fury, but she remained silent. The attorney nodded. "Then I believe we can proceed with the restoration of power. Is there someone who can accompany the property owner to verify the reconnection?" Several board members volunteered, pointedly excluding Karen. "There is one additional matter," called a voice from the crowd. It was Thomas Wilson, the treasurer who had visited me secretly. He stood up, visibly nervous but determined. "I believe the community should be made aware of certain financial irregularities I have discovered." The room fell silent. Karen's head snapped up, her eyes narrow with warning. Thomas continued despite her glare. The proposed clubhouse renovation included a contract with Matthews Interior Design, a company owned by Karen's sister. The contract was never put out for competitive bidding as required by our bylaws. The price was inflated by at least 30% above market rate. The revelation hit the room like a thunderclap. Residents gasped. Someone shouted, "That is theft." Another yelled, "Corruption." Karen finally spoke, her voice trembling with rage. "That is a lie. The board approved." "The board was not shown the ownership documents," Thomas interrupted. "I only discovered the connection last week when researching state business registrations." More revelations followed. The security company recently hired at premium rates was owned by Karen's brother-in-law. The landscaping service belonged to her cousin. Nearly every major contract approved in the past 2 years had benefited Karen's family members, all at inflated prices paid with our dues. A motion was immediately raised to remove Karen from the board. The vote was nearly unanimous. Only Karen and her closest ally opposed it. By noon, she had been officially stripped of her position. By 1:00 p.m., the membership had voted to pursue legal action to recover misappropriated funds. I left the meeting early, accompanied by the vice president and 2 community volunteers. We walked to my property, where I unlocked the utility cabinet and restored power to the community facilities. The streetlights flickered to life despite the daylight. The fountain pumps resumed their gentle hum. The electronic gate began its regular cycle. That afternoon, a forensic accountant arrived to begin the audit. Emergency notifications went out to all residents informing them that dues would return to their previous levels immediately. All outstanding fines were canceled pending review. I declined when asked if I would consider joining the interim board. "I am not interested in power," I explained. "I just wanted fairness." As the audit proceeded over the following weeks, the full extent of Karen's financial mismanagement became clear. She had treated the HOA account as her personal slush fund, directing hundreds of thousands of dollars to family members through inflated contracts and unnecessary projects. The community filed a civil lawsuit against her. She was ordered to pay restitution. Her reputation was destroyed. And perhaps most satisfying of all, she was forced to comply with every HOA regulation to the letter while trying desperately to sell her house in a market now aware of her history. Justice, when it finally arrived, was complete. 6 months passed. Spring arrived, bringing new growth to Oak Ridge Estates, both literal and figurative. The community had healed and transformed. The HOA still existed, but in a form almost unrecognizable from Karen's reign. Meetings were now live-streamed for transparency. Financial reports were published monthly. Every major decision required a community vote. Each morning, I walked my dog along the same paths I had walked for years, but the experience was entirely different. Neighbors who had once hurried past with averted eyes now stopped to chat. People gathered in front gardens and driveways, no longer fearful of arbitrary citations for unauthorized congregating or excessive noise. Actual violations Karen had invented and enforced. "There goes our electrician," Mr. Parsons would joke whenever I passed his house. The nickname had stuck, a badge of honor rather than mockery. The most visible change was Karen's house. It stood empty, a "for sale" sign perpetually planted in the front yard. Despite multiple price reductions, no one had made an offer. Everyone knew its history. Everyone knew who had lived there. The house had become a monument to hubris and corruption, a warning against the dangers of unchecked power. I often found myself staring at that empty house during my walks, not with satisfaction or pride, but with a strange melancholy. In fighting against Karen's tyranny, I had discovered something about myself, a capacity for calculated action, for strategic thinking, for wielding power effectively. These revelations were not entirely comfortable. The man who had turned off the power that night was not entirely the same man who had opened that dues increase letter months earlier. One evening, as I sat on my back porch watching the sunset, Jennifer joined me with 2 glasses of wine. "A new family is moving in next week," she said, handing me a glass. "2 doors down, they have 2 children about the same age as ours." "Did you tell them about everything that happened?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, that is the past. They deserve a fresh start without those shadows." I nodded, appreciating her wisdom. The community had moved forward, establishing new traditions and stronger bonds. The annual barbecue, once a stiff, formal affair under Karen's supervision, had become a genuine celebration with record attendance. The community garden, previously restricted by countless regulations, now flourished with diverse plantings reflecting the personalities of the residents tending them. Occasionally, I received updates about Karen. She had moved to a condominium across town, no HOA. The lawsuits had depleted her savings. Her interior design business had lost clients when the scandal made local headlines. Her social standing, once so important to her, had collapsed entirely. I felt no joy in her downfall. What had driven me was not vengeance but justice, not hatred but principle. The distinction mattered to me, though I sometimes wondered if the difference was as clear to others as it was in my mind. In my home office desk drawer, I kept the key to the utility cabinet, not as a trophy but as a reminder. A reminder that systems of power rest on foundations often invisible until exposed. A reminder that one person with knowledge and determination can effect change when necessary. A reminder of responsibilities that come with such knowledge. I never told anyone, but sometimes, late at night when I could not sleep, I would take out that key and hold it in my palm, feeling its weight and significance. In those quiet moments, I would reflect on how close we all are always to darkness, and how important it is to know where the light switches are located. The new family moved in as Jennifer had mentioned. Their children soon became friends with ours. We invited them for dinner, welcoming them to the neighborhood with genuine warmth. When they asked about the empty house with the fatting for sale sign, I simply said it had been unoccupied for some time. Some stories are better left untold, at least initially. Some lessons must be discovered rather than taught. What mattered was that Oak Ridge Estates had found its balance again, not a perfect community, but one where power was distributed more equitably, where rules existed to serve residents rather than control them. As for me, I had never wanted power. I had only wanted peace. In the end, I had found both, learning that sometimes you must embrace one to secure the other.